Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies, and this is England from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey. England. The following is a brief resume of the history of Freemasonry in England as it has hitherto been written and is now generally received by the fraternity. It is but right, however, to say that recent researches have thrown doubts on the authenticity of many of these statements, that the legend of Prince Edwin has been doubted, the establishment of a Grand Lodge at York in the beginning of the 18th century denied, and the existence of anything but operative masonry before 1717 controverted. These questions are still in dispute by the labors of Masonic antiquaries, through which many old records and ancient constitutions are being constantly exhumed from the British Museum and from lodge libraries, will eventually enable us to settle upon the truth. According to Anderson and Preston, the first charter granted in England to the Masons as a body was bestowed by King Athelstan in 926 upon the application of his brother, Prince Edwin. Accordingly, says Anderson, quoting from the Old Constitutions, Constitution 738, page 64, Prince Edwin summoned all the free and accepted Masons in the realm to meet him in a congregation at York, who came and formed the Grand Lodge under him as their Grand Master, A.D. 926. They brought with them many old writings and records of the craft, some in Greek, some in Latin, some in French, and other languages. And from the contents thereof they framed the constitutions of the English lodges, and made a law for themselves to preserve and observe the same in all time coming. From this assembly at York, the rise of Masonry in England is generally dated. From the statutes there enacted are derived the English Masonic constitutions, and from the place of meeting, the ritual of the English lodges is designated as the ancient York Rite. For a long time, the York Assembly exercised the Masonic jurisdiction over all England. But in 1567, the Masons of the southern part of the island elected Sir Thomas Gresham, the celebrated merchant, their Grand Master, according to Anderson. Constitutions, 1738, page 81. He was succeeded by the Earl of Effingham, the Earl of Huntingdon, and by the illustrious architect Inigo Jones. In the beginning of the 18th century, Masonry in the south of England had fallen into decay. The disturbances of the Revolution which passed William III on the throne and the subsequent warmth of political feelings which agitated the two parties of the state had given this peaceful society a wound fatal to its success. Sir Christopher Wren, the Grand Master in the reign of Queen Anne, had become aged, infirm, and inactive, and hence the general assemblies of the Grand Lodge had ceased to take place. There were, in the year 1715, but 4 lodges in the south of England, all working in the city of London. These 4 lodges, desiring of reviving the posterity of the order, determined to unite themselves under a Grand Master. Sir Christopher Wren, being now dead, and now having, as yet, been appointed in his place. But in 1716, the few lodges at London found themselves neglected by Sir Christopher Wren, thought it fit to submit under a Grand Lodge as the center of union and harmony. And so 4 of the London lodges meet at the Apple Tree Tavern, and having put into the chair the oldest Master Mason, now the Master of a Lodge, they constituted themselves a Grand Lodge, pro tempore, in due form, and forthwith revived the quarterly communication of the officers of lodges, called the Grand Lodge, resolved to hold the annual assembly and feast, and then to choose a Grand Master from among themselves, till they should have the honor of a noble brother at their head. Anderson, Constitutions, 1738, page 109. Accordingly, on St. John the Baptist Day, 1717, the annual assembly and feast were held, and Mr. Anthony Sayer duly proposed and elected Grand Master. the Grand Lodge adopted among its regulations the following: that the privilege of assembling as Masons, which had hitherto been unlimited, should be vested in certain lodges or assemblies of Masons convened in certain places, and that every lodge to be hereafter convened, except the 4 old lodges at this time existing, should be legally authorized to act by a warrant from the Grand Master for the time being, granted to certain individuals by petition, with the consent and approbation of the Grand Lodge in communication, and that without such warrant no lodge should be hereafter deemed regular or constitutional. In complement, however, to the 4 old lodges, the privileges which they had always possessed under the old organization were particularly reserved to them, and it was enacted that no law, rule, or regulation to be hereafter made or passed in Grand Lodge should deprive them of such privilege or encroach on any landmark which was at that time established as the standard of Masonic government. Preston, Illustrations, 1792, pages 248 and 249. The Grand Lodges of York and of London kept up a friendly intercourse and mutual interchange of recognition, until the latter body in 1725 granted a warrant of constitution to some Masons who had succeeded from the former. This un-Masonic act was severely reprobated by the York Grand Lodge, and produced the first interruption to the harmony that had long subsisted between them. It was, however, followed some years after by another unjustifiable act of interference. In 1735, the Earl of Crawford, Grand Master of England, constituted 2 lodges within the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of York, and granted, without its consent, deputations for Lancashire, Durham, and Northumberland. This circumstance, says Preston, Illustration, 1792, page 279, the Grand Lodge at York highly resented, and ever afterward viewed the proceedings of the brethren in the South with a jealous eye. All friendly intercourse ceased, and the York Masons from that moment considered their interest distinct from the Masons under the Grand Lodge in London. 3 years after, in 1738, several brethren, dissatisfied with the conduct of the Grand Lodge of England, seceded from it and held unauthorized meetings for the purpose of initiation. Taking advantage of the breach between the Grand Lodges of York and London, they assumed the charter of York Masons. On the Grand Lodge's determination to put strictly execution the laws against such seceders, they still further separated from its jurisdiction and assumed the appellation of Ancient York Masons. They announced that the ancient landmarks were alone preserved by them, and declaring that the regular lodges had adopted new plans and sanctioned innovations, they branded them with the name of Modern Masons. In 1739, they established a new Grand Lodge in London under the name of the Grand Lodge of Ancient York Masons, and preserving in the measures they had adopted, held communications and appointed annual feasts. They were soon afterwards recognized by the Masons of Scotland and Ireland, and were encouraged and fostered by many of the nobility. The 2 Grand Lodges continued to exist and to act in opposition to each other, extending their schisms into other countries, especially into America, until the year 1813, under the Grand Mastership of the Duke of Sussex. They were united under the title of the United Grand Lodge of England. Such is the history of Freemasonry in England as uninterruptedly believed by all Masons and Masonic writers for nearly a century and a half. Recent researches have thrown great doubts on its entire accuracy. Until the year 1717, the details are either traditional or supported only by manuscripts whose authenticity has not yet been satisfactorily proved. Much of the history is uncertain. Some of it, especially as referring to York, is deemed apocryphal by Hogan and other laborious writers. Yet, as the hereditary tradition of the order, it cannot be safely or justly thrown altogether aside, though it should be received with many reservations until the profound researches of Masonic antiquities, now being actively pursued in England, shall have been brought to a satisfactory conclusion. The investigations of this important subject should be conducted with impartial judgment and with an earnest desire to find the truth and not to uphold a theory. The legend may not be true, but if it has been long accepted and venerated as truth, it should not be rejected until there is incontestable evidence of its falsity. In criticisms of this kind, we should remember the caution of an eminent metaphysician that the hand that cannot build a hovel may demolish a palace. So far, the researches of these inquiries into the early history of English Freemasonry, of whom Brother Hewan of Cornwall may justly be considered as the chief, have been generally conducted with earnest fairness and laborious learning. C. York. And Brother Henry Sadler, in his Masonic Facts and Fictions, has proven that the ancients were not really a schismatic body of succeeders from the premier Grand Lodge of England, but were Irish Masons settled in London, who in 1751 established a body which they called the Grand Lodge of England according to the old institutions, maintaining that they alone preserved the ancient tenets and practices of Masonry. See Ancient Masons, ELH. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.